G'day mate, you probably know Australia for two things, kangaroos and Hugh Jackman. Well, three, if you count the monstrous spiders roaming around, but apparently there's a lot more to the Aussie country than meets the eye. In today's video, we've rounded up all the weird things scientists have discovered in Australia. So without further ado, let's get digging. First, Ball's Pyramid. That's a pretty unfortunate name for a pyramid, we know, but there's actually a story behind it. We'll get to that in a bit. Turns out there's actually a land down under Australia, or at least there used to be at one point in time. Quick history lesson. Some 80 million years ago, a landmass broke away from Gondwana when the Tasman Sea opened up, and that's how the lost continent of Zealandia split away from Australia and Antarctica. Talk about the breakup of the century. According to satellite imagery, Zealandia was almost the size of Australia. If you ask us, they were meant to be together. If it wasn't for the sea, the Kiwis and the kangaroos would still be together. For those of you who haven't figured it out yet, New Zealand is the biggest part of Zealandia that is above sea level. Anywho, coming back to present-day Australia, it only has one thing left to show for its time with old New Zealand, and that's the Ball Pyramid. It's actually named after Henry Ligbird Ball, the Royal Navy lieutenant who discovered it way back in 1788. So that's where it gets its unique name from. Standing tall at around 2,000 feet, it's the tallest volcanic stack in the world. The pyramid might not seem under Australia, but it actually lies about 160 feet underwater near Lord Howe Island. We'd say that counts. Next, we have a type of titanosaur. Okay, so this is one of the fairly recent discoveries in Australia. If you've never heard of this dinosaur, we don't blame you. We mean, the T-Rex has pretty much hogged all the spotlight since it was discovered, so it's okay. This newly discovered species basically belongs to the family of long-necked plant-eating sauropods. Now, what's interesting about the one discovered in Australia is that it's the largest species of dinosaur ever found in the country. The Australotitan cooperensis was between 82 and 98 feet long, basically half of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and about 16.4 to 21.3 feet high. It also weighed a ton, well, 23 to 74 tons really. Imagine living with this dino on Earth. It might have been vegetarian, but who's to say we wouldn't have been trampled by it? Thankfully, it lived about 92 to 96 million years ago. And we don't know about you, but we sure are glad it's not a Jurassic World out there. The fossilized skeleton was discovered in outback Queensland. And if you ever do decide to pay a visit to the Aussies, then you'd have to take a short trip to Winton to see the world's largest collection of Australian dinosaur fossils. And now, Shark Bay cockles. We bet you've heard of Australia's beautiful shell beaches, but if you haven't, we've got you covered. Located some 45 kilometers southeast of Denham, there's a snow-white beach made up of billions and billions of tiny shells. As unbelievable as it may sound, it's actually true. There is nothing but tiny seashells for over 70 kilometers. Not even sand. It's super Instagrammable. You'll have to take our word for it, but how does this fit into our video about scientists and weird things in Australia? We'll tell you how. 3 words: Shark Bay cockles. It's because of these little creatures that Australia has such unique beaches. They're basically brown mollusks living in tiny, very white shells. They thrive in super salty waters. Lucky for them, their predators cannot. That's why there's so many of them on the seaside. Next is feather stars. Speaking of creatures of the sea, here's one that's just plain strange. A feather star essentially looks like a bright feathery flower, but don't let it fool you. These sneaky little things can crawl, roll, walk, and even swim through the seas, although they're not the fastest in any of those things, so they prefer clinging to sponges and corals. They might look weird, but at least they aren't lethal. While most of the sea life can be beautiful and threatening at the same time, feather stars are pretty much harmless and live off of tiny drifting organisms and particles. You might come across fossilized versions of these creatures, as they like to stick to floating driftwood where they decay over time. Not the most adventurous life if you ask us, but we legit spent the last 2 years locked inside of our houses, so can't really judge them either. Now for the ox-eye Oreo. If you suddenly thought of the little round biscuits, then you're not alone, but one look at this fish and you'll forget all about them. Despite the name, the ox-eye Oreo looks nothing like your favorite snack. It might have a disc-shaped body, but it looks like someone drizzled burnt caramel over it. That is, if we're sticking to food analogies. species here. But believe it or not, this fish was not named after a dessert. The ox-eye aurea, or the Oreosama atlanticum, was named that because of the shape. Oreosama literally means mountain body, and sure enough, if you turn it upside down, you'll get a perfect little mountain range. Scientists found this strange-looking fish at least 500 meters deep. We doubt we would have believed it without seeing it ourselves, because it looks like it came straight out of a cartoon. Up next, the bubble snail. A little heads up, this just might be the prettiest snail you've ever seen. And if you never thought you'd call a snail pretty, then you probably never saw the bubble snail. This creature is basically the Cinderella of its kind, to its perfectly pinked patterned shell and pretty white body with the slightest hint of blue. Fun fact, these snails do not tuck and roll in their shells. We mean, would you want to if you were that pretty? We don't think so. The perfectly manicured creature basically just go through life grazing on algae and laying ribbon-like eggs. It sounds like the life, don't you think? Now onto megamouth shark. Let's move on to something more deadly, shall we? Sharks. We've seen them eat up entire ships of people more times than we can count, to be honest. Safe to say, sharks aren't exactly the rarest creatures in the sea. But tell you what, scientists found one of the unique species of shark in Australia. The megamouth shark is nothing like you've seen before. It has this weird blunt head that's bigger than its abdomen, and its body tapers back to its fins. Believe it or not, only 3 of these bad boys have been discovered. Wondering how Australian scientists got their hands on the megamouth? Well, one fine day back in 1988, one of these sharks washed up on the beach, very much alive. They were quick to take it in and preserve it for years to come. You can actually see this super unique beast in the Western Australian Museum. Next up is pearlfish. There might be plenty of fish in the sea, but there's none like the pearlfish. This is possibly the most slender fish you've ever heard of. It's translucent, it's scaleless, and it takes full advantage of being pencil thin. If you thought this fish would come with a bunch of pearls, boy were you wrong. But frankly, it tricked us all. The only reason for its very attractive name is that it was once found inside an oyster, bedded in a pearl. Dead. A bit cruel to name it that, don't you think? It's a good thing they found it with a pearl. Could have just as easily been named after anything from clams to starfish, because it chooses to live in the body cavities of such creatures, giving us the willies just thinking about it. Here's a not so fun tidbit about the pearlfish. A notorious few live exclusively in the anuses of sea cucumbers. Now onto the orangutan crab. The Australian waters seem to be filled with creatures fit for the Fantastic Beasts franchise. Here's one that might remind you of Newt Scamander's pet, the pocket-sized bowtruckle. The orangutan crab is very small and is covered in fine rust-red hair from its eye stalks all the way to its long legs. One look at it and you'll get why it's named that. Interestingly, not only are they the smallest kind of crab, but they are also the most lonely ones. But don't go on feeling sad for them just yet. These little creatures choose the single life and enjoy their time feeding on plankton and debris. And finally, the handfish. Here's a challenge for you. Try not to laugh looking at these super weird fish with fins that look like literal human hands. They come in all sorts of strange colors and shapes. Funnily, they prefer to walk on their pelvic fins instead of swimming. Unsurprisingly, these funny looking fish are practically harmless. How much could a hand possibly harm you after all? They only eat small mollusks and worms in Australian waters. And that about wraps up our video for today, folks. Which of these discoveries from the land down under did you find most astonishing? Let us know in the comments down under. Be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.